Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, the longtime radio play by play announcer for the Boston Celtics, Sean Grande. Sean, welcome to the show.
I always know when I hear the word long time, that's code for old guy. Long time voice of the Celtics.
Yes, you are. And that also means you've had many memories. You've been able to witness so many eras. You've announced the third most Celtics games of all time. You called your 2000th NBA game back in 2020. And you and Cedric Maxwell, as a pairing, have called the most games in Celtics history. So you have a ton of experience announcing for the Boston Celtics. And we're going to break all that down. But I kind of want to go to the very beginning of your career. When did you even realize this was something you wanted to get into? And what has been your career path since to get to the point where you're at now?
Very signature moment when I realized I was not going to play second base for the Mets. That was pretty much the moment I said, okay, well, how do I get there? I have to get – my life is about making the major leagues somehow. How do I do it? And once it was apparent, it's very difficult. When you grow up in Greenwich Village, very few great athletes come out of Greenwich Village because you've been playing on – you grow up in Manhattan, your athletic career is over at 12 because your knees are – you've been playing on concrete your whole life, so your knees are pretty much done. And I knew it was what I wanted to do. I was captivated by not just the games and the players, but I was captivated by the announcers growing up and the ones that told the stories to me. And that seemed like a really cool way to do it. And if I could be the one telling stories, then that would be that'd be a nice substitute for not being able to play second for the Mets.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much like what a lot of announcers say. When they realize they cannot be an athlete, they transition over to the announcing world. And you've had a ton of success in that announcing world. You've been, as I mentioned, the Celtics announcer for a long time. But Boston is known for their passionate fan base, and honestly, any of the major sports. It's not a college town; it's a professional town, and they love the Boston Celtics, and they're very passionate about it. Why do you think Boston is the way they are, and why are their fans so much more passionate than most fan bases out there?
I think there's an element of intensity in the Northeast as someone who grew up in New York and has been around Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. I also think there's an element of birthright with the Celtics winning and being competitive that it just became part of my son's 12 and it's like part of the birthright that you get to see a Celtics championship. So I think that's certainly a significant part of it. And I think maybe because it's just so cold here, we all have to stay inside and watch games.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something about the Northeast. But yeah, and really, I mean, that you're right. It's kind of like that triangle between Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. And all of those fan bases are really known to be so passionate. And we've seen the Celtics be good for so long. We saw the Bill Russell era, the Larry Bird era. We even saw the Paul Pierce, KG, Ray Allen era. Now we're seeing this era of Celtics basketball. They just took home the title. But I mentioned how you've been doing this for a long time. You've witnessed many of great Celtics eras. Which has been your favorite to announce out of all of these great
Well, it's
eras?
funny. You don't think of it as eras, but it really is. And I think you're something to remember if you're me is you're older than you don't want to say it, but you're older than you think you are. And what that means is when '08 to me, the 80s seems like a million years ago. Like that's my dad's time or whatever. But '08 seems like it almost just happened, where you have to realize, no, '08 is a long time ago now. I'm not wearing it now. I should have for show and tell, but I've been wearing the '08 ring a lot just so I could do a bit at different places I've been speaking about how I didn't want the '08 ring to be jealous because he's getting a younger brother. I didn't want him to be jealous of the younger brother. So I started to want to wear him. But you realize that is a long time, so much so that, say, people you may have a random conversation with, I don't know, like now, might not have been alive, right, when that happened. So to me, I've got to go back to that's like talking about something from the early 70s to me, which is, you don't think about stuff that happened. When you think about something that happened before you were born, that's ancient history. And you have to remember the interesting thing about broadcasting, you're not narrowcasting, you are broadcasting to a wide variety of people. In my specific job, if I'm doing a Celtics game on TV or radio, there are people watching or listening who are 90 and there are people who are 9. And you have to have a historical perspective that allows you to communicate to, not to mention the language that all you guys speak now, that my son doesn't want me to learn and all what the words mean and stuff like that. But you've got to be able to speak to everybody and not seem too old to someone who's, oh, that old guy's talking, or try to talk in a way that is too young for older people. You got to find a way to, bring everybody together. And that, to me, I ended up saying something randomly in the fourth quarter of Game 5 about the children of Celtics Nation, who are like the kids in the 60s, get one more, and the kids of the 80s get one for their kids, and the kids of Garnett and Pierce and Ray Allen, they get one as adults, and now the kids today of Celtics Nation finally, have their own. And that to me was a way to tie it together of, that when you have stewardship of a franchise, if you're the voice of the Boston Celtics, that means, yeah, okay, I've been that for 20 something years and whatever, but it also means you are the caretaker of the history as well. And you have to tie together what happened in 2024 with what happened in 1986, which is the best statistical comp, and what may have happened in the 50s and 60s, and that you want to document in real time the history that this team made in and of itself, but also where does it fit with 86 and 08 and Larry Bird and Bill Russell. And so, it's important to be able to do that.
Right, and the Celtics have been such an accomplished franchise, the most championships in history. And I actually just spoke recently to Ian Eagle, and he was talking about how you have to cater to so many different types of people that are watching a game, whether that be, fantasy players or bettors or casual fans or diehard fans, or as you brought up, different ages and different eras that people were really in love with this team that's been so good for so long. So you're 100% right, and catering to all of those different eras is obviously a huge part of your job.
Don't listen. Ian doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't listen to him. I'm proud to call him a friend, and it's real. I did a very funny video when Noah first started with the Clippers 4 or 5 years ago. It was during the pandemic, and he and Ian had done a little video together because they were together during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I did a video basically talking to the camera like this, essentially saying, it's what an extraordinary accomplishment for Noah to be 23 and to be doing NBA games, and kind of made me wonder why my son hasn't accomplished that yet. And I bring him into the frame, and of course he's 8. So it's like, I'm only 8. I'm like, well, what kind of excuse is that? Like, just work harder.
Love it.
Yeah. But I was so happy to see both of them, and whenever I get a chance.
Absolutely. Both of them are incredible at what they do, and both of them are, just like you, amazing play-by-play announcers. But I want to focus on this specific era of Celtics basketball, the one that took home a championship last year to give them their 18th championship, the most ever. And not only did they win the championship, but they did it in pretty dominating fashion. Not one series, went to 6 or 7 games. What was it about last year's team that made them so much more dominant than everyone else in the NBA?
They fit together, and they – you added the Porzingis piece. People would say, like, how could they be so much better? I'm like, well, now there's a 7'3" guy that nobody can stop.
Right.
Offensively. So it's something that they didn't have, in the years before that. And it's funny, as historical, the other part of my job is to document in real time and not be caught off guard. So instead, I was sort of the town crier last year saying, does everybody realize what's happening now? Does everybody realize in January that they're playing like one of the best teams to ever play? And I said, I did a podcast and I'd say 2/3 of the way through the season at some point, like maybe late February. And I said, for everyone worried about, well, how are they going to blow it? Or are they going to skate by and maybe win the championship? I said, no one is considering the fact that maybe it's not going to be hard. Maybe they're going to walk backwards into this thing. And maybe they're going to, now I literally said on this podcast, somebody sent it to me later and it made it out on social media, that I literally said, what if they don't, there is no game 7 or game 6. What if it's one of those historically good teams? And I remember saying at the time, people were like, Grande, don't say that. You're going to – I said, stop being afraid. Like the one thing that struck me about this team with fans this last season was Boston is a team, as you said, a town with great intensity and also great swagger about its sports. Fair, whether they should or not. The fear to swagger ratio was way too high this past year when they were just beating the living daylights out of everybody. And they were so clearly the best team because of what had happened in previous years. 08, that team won in its first year together. So there was no, and then almost was on scholarship for the ones that got away in the subsequent years. Right. Whereas this team was the exact opposite because they were so ahead of schedule getting to the conference finals in 17 and 18 and 20 and 23. It was almost as if, they had underachieved, which they hadn't. They hadn't underachieved, but they had to, the expectations were so crazy high. That was the difference to me, was what the story of this team was dominating when everybody said they had to win, and they actually did. You can't do better than winning, but they actually didn't just win. They were one of the best teams ever. Like, how can you possibly live up to the expectations that you have to win the championship or else are so absurd to begin with. And then they not only won the championship, they won it going backwards.
You're right. I think as someone who is a more of a casual NBA fan for the playoffs, you would know from my Wiz Talk with Chase podcast, I'm a Wizards fan, so I've had nothing really to worry about in the postseason for a very long time now. So as someone casual, I was wondering, like, is there going to be that point like we've seen in previous years in the Miami series in 23 or the Golden State series in 22? When is this team maybe going to crumble? And they didn't. And I think part of that was obviously Jaylen Brown making that step into being that maybe 1A, 1B with Jason Tatum. And even though Tatum's always kind of been considered the number one on that team, at least in my eyes, Jaylen Brown was the one who came home with the Finals MVP award. Were you shocked to kind of see Jaylen Brown take that next step, maybe even above Jason Tatum come postseason time?
I wasn't shocked that he played the way he played. He's been, an elite player for a long time, and obviously, again, as you said, you positioned it right. That it's easy for people just to think of a team having one dominant player and then the supporting cast because it's just convenient. But it's more complicated than that. The irony, to me, I don't say the irony of Jaylen getting both Conference Finals MVP and Finals MVP is that the true nature of this team and how dominant they were, the best measure of it to me is that you can make a legitimate case, not only that Jaylen wasn't the MVP in either series, you can make a legit case. Like, to me, if I had to vote, we didn't vote. I had no problem with Jaylen winning, and it was fine no matter what, but I probably, push come to shove, I probably would have voted for Jrue Holiday for Conference Finals MVP, and I probably would have voted for Tatum off the Game 5, pushing him a little bit past, but who cares? And the point being that you could make a very easy case, and I'll do it right now, that there was a different MVP for all 4 series the Celtics played. Let's say Jaylen was the MVP of the finals and Jrue Holiday was the MVP of the conference finals. Tatum was probably the best player in the Cleveland series, and Derek White was the best player in the first round against Miami. And how Celtics was that? And also in the year that everyone said, well, guys got hurt and they got lucky and they didn't have to play this guy in the playoffs. And no, Porzingis was the one guy all year. Everybody said, oh, they can't lose Porzingis. That's the one guy they can't lose. They lost him and they won easily anyway.
Right. Yeah, and it showed how much depth this team has, and you really look at all that star power that anyone could step up at any time. And I feel that Jrue Holiday move really just elevated them so much. And what the Boston front office has tried to do is they're trying to keep all these players together, and they have. They've extended some of these guys to record-breaking extensions, and the core is at least together for one more season. They have guys like Brown and Tatum extended for even longer. I'm pretty sure Derek White's extended for longer. But Boston is now becoming one of the more expensive teams. We're seeing the owner possibly selling the team after all these contracts are happening. Do you feel it's sustainable for the Celtics to get back to this championship level when they have the most expensive roster in the NFL? And I mean, in the NBA, excuse me. And is it going to be harder to build out a roster around some of these stars?
It started to look like an NFL roster with the price tag that is attached to it, 12, 15 guys. But the short answer, they can win this year, certainly. But the big picture is, when we look back, I'll be too old. I'll be too senile to look back 20, 30, 40 years from now. But you'll be able to look back and see how rare teams winning back-to-back in the NBA is going to be now in the era we're in now, because the league doesn't want it. And the league has put very draconian measures in place. Look it up, kids. Punishment for teams that are going to be way over the cap, like the Celtics, and over the second apron, that they don't want this. They don't want a team like Golden State winning, being in the finals 5 straight years. They don't want that. So it's going to be very difficult after this coming season. It's going to be really hard for the Celtics to keep this group together. The punishment for doing it is going to be huge financially. You're going to lose draft picks. You're not going to be able to sign free agents. And so you're fighting against that. I think people are just starting to realize it now. You wait and see when salary moves in the league rules start forcing the Celtics to break this team up. People are going to go crazy in Boston by the time we get to next summer. But all you can do in the NBA and in most professional sports is put yourself in position to win. Be around it. The Red Sox were like the best team in 2004. They were the best team in 2007. But the championship they won in 2013 was because they were one of the best teams. And they were around it. And then you get lucky with injuries or whatever. And what the Celtics have done for most of the last, about 8 years now, the Celtics have been in the conversation, had a chance to win. And eventually it's going to go your way.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of how much parity there is in the NBA, and a lot of that is because of the new rules in place with the CBA and the second apron and kind of punishing these over the cap teams, as you just mentioned, like Boston is. We've now seen 6 different champions in the last 6 years after the Golden State, Cleveland, 4 straight finals or whatever it was at that time. They've really kind of made a switch. And we've seen 6 new champions each season. Do you think parity is good for the NBA? Because while it may sound great on paper, now we're not seeing these stars continuing to step up, and we're not seeing these eras that maybe, when I'm older, my kids will remember from the 2020s era of the NBA.
Well, the short answer is I would suggest to you that the television deal that was recently done would indicate that the league is doing just fine, thank you very much, without teams repeating. And it's about the stars, and it's about, getting people to watch on TV because they want to see these players play. And we may romanticize about – people might romanticize – I don't think anybody romanticizes about Golden State versus Cleveland 4 years in a row, but the Golden State era, and, of course, people that are older are going to use Celtics and Lakers and the 8, things like that. It's not going to work that way anymore. This is becoming a league more about individual stars, and they're going to lead their teams. And if you're lucky, you're going to get teams that could have, right. We could get through this whole era easily and never have one Boston-Denver final. Like maybe Denver wins this year and the Celtics win the year after, and maybe then. So it might not happen. But we're literally looking at Warner Brothers Discovery and TNT, who said the NBA for 32 years, literally is going to be out of the NBA business because the rights fees have gotten so insane and out of control that, you have to look at it's like the economy. If the economy's great, you're not questioning the individual fiscal policies that are leading. If the economy's great, the economy's great. And yeah, we lose rivalries. We lose the one thing like Major League Baseball. Everyone romanticized about the 50s and 60s and 70s because it was always the Yankees and the Dodgers and whatever, because players couldn't change teams because they had a reserve clause and owners kept players completely under wraps. Free agency is going to ruin the game. Well, it ruined the idea that players are going to play in the same city for 7, 8, 10 years or their entire career. But Major League Baseball just took off financially once there was free agency. It was counter to what we thought. It made the league more interesting to more people.
Right. And you mentioned on the NBA right now is catering to some of the new eras of basketball, which is more of a players' league. And that's how I got into the NBA. I was essentially in love with James Harden's game. I loved him as an offensive player. And that's how I really became in love with the NBA. Do you think
you didn't love him as a defensive player?
Yeah, when my 8-year-old self was not paying attention to the 4 steps to the first line, and everything else was going on, the postseason success. Yeah, my 8-year-old self was not really paying attention. I love the 36 points a game. That's all I love. But it's a great example of they make the stars, and it caters to 8 and 9-year-olds who then become NBA fans for the rest of their life. Do you think it's good now that the NBA has become a players' league instead of a teams' league?
It's not the same league that it was when I was a kid. Baseball isn't the same when I was a kid, but I'm not an old guy that, yells at clouds and says, "Oh, it was better back in my day." I don't like interleague play in baseball. Now that to you must sound like the most ancient, because I grew up at a time that the American League only played the American League teams, and the National League only played the National League teams. So it's what I knew. But to me, it's far more about what you like. And I mean specifically you, than me, because it's about what is going to bring young people. What's the next generation? What makes you a fan? And that to me is as poignant as anything I've heard about. You become a fan of the individual player era, and then you become, a fan of teams. And if you're here's what it does. It allows you to do. There's 30 teams. And as you know, the Washington Wizards right now are closer to 30 than they are to 1. So realistically, what's the earliest the Washington Wizards could be in this conversation for getting to the second rounds of the playoffs, say, 3 years away, 4 years, right. But the point being, how are we going to make Chase an NBA fan while his team is not competing for, if you're a hardcore fan, you're going to love it. I grew up, the Mets of my childhood were horrific, but I love baseball and I love the Mets. And so you're rooting for them. So the hardcores will be the hardcores, but you want to know, if you're a Washington fan, okay, is our team going to be a little better? We're going to be a little more competitive. But when is Wemby coming to town?
Right.
When is Jason Tatum? When are the Celtics coming? When can I see them? When is LeBron James coming to Washington? So that you have to create a league that is about that for you. It's going to give you a reason, because you're going to watch. Hey, I want to watch Anthony Edwards against, Chet Holmgren on on the NBC game of the week on Monday night. I want to watch that. Even though I'm a Wizards fan, I want to watch those games, and I'm into the league because I'm into the players. So to me, whatever makes people love the game, I'm all for.
And I love to hear that because some other people who like not kids my age and some of the older NBA fans, they don't like to hear that it's a players league. But I'm glad that you kind of have that perspective on it.
Do you know what I get all the time? Oh, I don't know. I don't like watching from people at my age or older. The NBA, all they do is jack up threes now. I'm like, the league has never been more popular.
Right.
There's never been more threes. Is it because they're taking more threes? It's the game. Like kids now, I can assure you about this. When I was your age, something I say to my son all the time, when I was your age, I wasn't out shooting 40-footers out in the parking lot. But now because of Steph and Dame Lillard and Trae Young and everybody else, now we're going to have a whole new generation. You think these guys are great shooters. What about the kids that have done nothing but do that?
Right.
Shooting is going to be at a premium. I asked Brad Stevens, as this shift was happening, it was early in the Brad Stevens, so we're probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And I said, historically, everything is always cyclical. So we're seeing more of this three-point shooting. Is it going to go back to playing more towards the middle? And he told me 8 years ago, he said, no, it's going to go the other way. It's going to go deeper, where the three-point line, which it now has, three-point line has become more of a suggestion than this, marker out in the swimming pool where you don't go past that line. Whatever you do, that line is as far as you can go. Now it's guys just pulling up 4, 5, 6 feet behind the three-point line, because how do you defend a shot like that? And so that's the direction it's going to go. And maybe there'll be another Wemby that's going to change it. And maybe Wemby shoot three-point shots, but you get the point that everything goes cyclical. And you have to me, what young people or what, people want to watch is what people want to watch. And you just cannot hold on to, hey, it's going to be the Celtics and Lakers every year, and the games are going to be on TNT or whatever. Everything changes. And my job is to document not what I want the game to be. My job is to document the game as it is and as it evolves. And if I don't like it, that's my problem. If I don't want to, if I can't wake up in the morning and go, hey, there's a Celtics, Thunder game tonight at the Garden that I get the call. If I wake up and go, oh man, I don't want to go to work and do that, I don't want to then it's time for me to find a different job, right? Like the game goes on. The game is determined by the fans and the players and what they want and what they love, and how economics obviously play into the idea of free. People aren't going to know. At least the NBA, you're probably going to have some players that are franchise players that are on a team for 10, 15, 20 years. It still could happen. It's hard for me. My son, I'm very lucky that he loves baseball. But to me, it's hard that in the major leagues, it feels like 20 out of 25 guys on your team change from year to year. They're different players, and that's just not the way it was when I grew up. But it changes. Baseball is still baseball. It's still awesome.
Right. And that's the thing about sports is we're all still going to love it. Sean Grande, this has been amazing, but obviously you're one of the bigger play-by-play voices in the NBA and getting.
I did it better. I was better than I am here, wasn't I, on the podcast? Because that's all I care about.
I mean, two of the best ever. Let me say.
I don't care about play-by-play. I just mean right here in this particular venue, he can't match me. He knows it. I'm going to tell him to his face. Next time I see him, I say, I killed you on that podcast.
Yeah, we got to have an Iron Eagle Sean Grande combined guest episode.
Now, you can only imagine, because we share a sense of humor that not everybody has. So you can only imagine, probably you get as much entertainment in our text exchanges back and forth. We're probably two of the few people that can actually, hit the ball back to each other at that level. So, yeah, he's awesome. So happy when I get to see him.
Yeah, I was so happy to get to talk to him, but I was so happy to get to talk to you as well, with you being one of the bigger play-by-play voices. Sean, before we wrap up this episode, if you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring play-by-play announcer like me or anyone else listening to this right now, what would it be and why?
Don't say no. When somebody calls you, the answer is yes. I got a call 25, uses a random example. I got a call 25 years ago. Hey, the World Cup was going on, so the guy that did the MLS games for the Revolution on TV was going to the World Cup, and they called me and they said, can you do soccer? What's the answer to that question?
Yes.
I'd never been to a soccer game in my life, but the answer was yes, because you do it, and you just do whatever you can do, because you never know what the next opportunity is. And the art of what I do is not being able to call baseball or basketball or hockey, or whatever, because a lot of people that do one of those things really well. Can you do all of it? Can you tell a story? Are you a storyteller? Do you love sports and telling stories enough that if they call me tomorrow to do a WNBA game, I've got enough of a background that I know what I can figure out what the stories are to tell, that you can do it. That to me is that's the art of what I do. It's why I jumped in randomly to MMA 10 years ago when I didn't know much about it. And it's ended up being a really cool part of my life. So don't say no is my advice, and prepare and work, because you cannot do a bad broadcast if you are extraordinarily well prepared. You cannot do a good broadcast no matter how talented you are if you are unprepared.
Sean Grande, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today, talking some announcing, talking some Celtics, talking some Iron Eagle and Sean Grande, texting drama. We really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming here today.
You got it, man.
Thank you so much. All right, the audience, I hope you guys did enjoy this episode alongside the voice of the Boston Celtics, Sean Grande. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.